obliged persons of fortune, both male and female, to give up their slaves, and they received their manumission at once, yet he kept them together under their own standard, unmixed with soldiers who were better born, and armed likewise after different fashion. Military rewards, such as trappings, collars, and other decorations of gold and silver, he distributed more readily than camp or mural crowns, which were reckoned more honorable than the former. These he bestowed sparingly, without partiality, and frequently even on common soldiers. He presented Marcus Agrippa, after the naval engagement in the Sicilian war, with a sea green banner. Those who shared in the honors of a triumph, although they had attended him in his expeditions and had taken part in his victories, he judged it improper to distinguish by the usual rewards for service, because they had a right themselves to grant such rewards to whom they pleased. He thought nothing more derogatory to the character of an accomplished general than precipitancy and rashness, on which account he had frequently in his mouth these proverbs: Speude bradeos, hasten slowly, and asphales gar est amenon, hierasis stratilites, the cautious captain's better than the bold, and that is done fast enough which is done well enough. He was wont to say also that a battle or a war ought never to be undertaken unless the prospect of gain overbalanced the fear of loss. For, said he, men who pursue small advantages with no small hazard resemble those who fish with a golden hook, the loss of which, if the line should happen to break, could never be compensated by all the fish they might take. He was advanced to public offices before the age at which he was legally qualified for them, and to some also of a new kind, and for life. He seized the consulship in the 20th year of his age, quartering his legions in a threatening manner near the city, and sending deputies to demand it for him in the name of the army. When the Senate demurred, a centurion named Cornelius, who was at the head of the chief deputation, throwing back his cloak and showing the hilt of his sword, had the presumption to say in the Senate house, "This will make him consul, if you will not." His second consulship he filled 9 years afterwards, his third after the interval of only 1 year, and held the same office every year successively until the 11th. From this period, although the consulship was frequently offered him, he always declined it, until, after a long interval, not less than 17 years, he voluntarily stood for the 12th, and 2 years after that for a 13th, that he might successively introduce into the forum, on their entering public life, his 2 sons, Caius and Lucius, while he was invested with the highest office in the state. In his 5 consulships, from the 6th to the 11th, he continued in office throughout the year, but in the rest, during only 9, 6, 4, or 3 months, and in his second no more than a few hours; for having sat for a short time in the morning, upon the calends of January, in his curule chair, before the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, he abdicated his office, and substituted another in his room. Nor did he enter upon them all at Rome, but upon the 4th in Asia, the 5th in the Isle of Samos, and the 8th and 9th in Tarragona. During 10 years he acted as one of the triumvirate for settling the commonwealth, in which office he for some time opposed his colleagues in their design of a proscription. But after it was begun he prosecuted it with more determined rigor than either of them. For whilst they were often prevailed upon by the interest and intercession of friends to show mercy, he alone strongly insisted that no one should be spared, and even proscribed Caius Toranius, his guardian, who had been formerly the colleague of his father Octavius in the aedileship. Junius Saturninus adds this farther account of him, that when, after the proscription was over, Marcus Lepidus made an apology in the Senate for their past proceedings, and gave them hopes of a more mild administration, he, on the other hand, declared that the only limit he had fixed to the proscription was, that he should be free to act as he pleased. Afterwards, however, repenting of his severity, he advanced Titus Vinius Philippoemen to the equestrian rank, for having concealed his patron at the time when he was proscribed. In this same office he incurred great odium upon many accounts. For as he was one day making an harangue, observing among the soldiers Pinarius, a Roman knight, admit some private citizens, and engaged in taking notes, He ordered him to be stabbed before his eyes, as a busybody and a spy upon him. He was so terrified in his menaces, Tedius Afer, the consul elect, for having reflected upon some actions of his, that he threw himself from a great height, and died on the spot. And when Quintus Gallius, the praetor, came to compliment him, he concealed, and not yet venturing to make a search, came to compliment him with a double tablet under his cloak, suspecting that it was a sword he had concealed, and not yet venturing to make a search, lest it should be found to be something else, he caused him to be dragged from his tribunal by centurions and soldiers, and tortured like a slave, and although he made no confession, ordered him to be put to death, after he had with his own hands plucked out his eyes. His own account of the matter, however, is, that Quintus Gallius sought a private conference with him for the purpose of assassinating him, that he therefore put him in prison, but afterwards released him and banished him from the city, when he had perished either in a storm at sea, or by falling into the hands of robbers. He twice entertained thoughts of restoring the republic. First, immediately after he had crushed Antony, remembering that he had often charged him with being an obstacle to its restoration. The second time was in consequence of a long illness, when he sent for the magistrates and the senate to his own house, and delivered them a particular account of the state of the empire, but reflecting at the same time that it would be both hazardous to himself to return to the condition of a private person, and might be dangerous to the public to have the government placed again under the control of the people, he resolved to keep it in his own hands. Whether with the better event or intention is hard to say. His good intentions he often affirmed in private discourse, and also published an edict, in which it was declared in the following terms: "May it be permitted me to have the happiness of establishing the commonwealth on a safe and sound basis, and thus enjoy the reward of which I am ambitious, that of being celebrated for moulding it into the form best adapted to present circumstances, so that, on my leaving the world, I may carry with me the hope that the foundations which I have laid for its future government will stand firm and stable." The city, which was not built in a manner suitable to the grandeur of the empire, and was liable to inundations of the Tiber, as well as to fires, was so much improved under his administration, that he boasted, not without reason, that he found it of brick, but left it of marble. He also rendered it secure for the time to come against such disasters, as far as could be effected by human foresight. A great number of public buildings were erected by him, the most considerable of which were a forum, containing the temple of Mars the Avenger, the temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill, and the temple of Jupiter Tonans in the Capitol. The reason of his building a new forum was the vast increase in the population, and the number of causes to be tried in the courts, for which, the two already existing not affording sufficient space, it was thought necessary to have a third. It was, therefore, opened for public use before the temple of Mars was completely finished, and a law was passed that causes should be tried, the judges chosen by lot in that place. The temple of Mars was built in fulfilment of a vow made during the war of Philippi, undertaken by him to avenge his father's murder. He ordained that the senate should always assemble there when they meet to deliberate respecting wars and triumphs, that thence should be dispatched all those who were sent into the provinces in command of armies, and that in it those who returned victorious from the wars should lodge the trophies of their triumphs. He erected the temple of Apollo in that part of his house on the Palatine Hill which had been struck with lightning, and which, on that account, the soothsayers declared the god to have chosen. He added porticos to it, with a library of Greek and Latin authors, and when advanced in years, used frequently there to hold the senate and examine the rolls of the judges. He dedicated the temple to Apollo Tonans, in acknowledgment of his escape from a great danger in his Cantabrian expedition, when, as he was travelling in the night, his litter was struck by lightning, which killed the slave who carried a torch before him. He likewise constructed some public buildings in the name of others, for instance his grandsons, his wife, and sister. Thus he built the portico and basilica of Lucius and Gaius, and the porticos of Livia and Octavia, and the theatre of Marcellus. He also often exhorted other persons of rank to embellish the city by new buildings, or repairing and improving old according to their means. In consequence of this recommendation, many were raised, such as the temple of Hercules and the Muses.